I'm happy to have the opportunity to share some Dhamma, encourage you in your practice, in your faith. Many of us know some of the origin story when the Sumedha received a prediction of Buddhahood from Dipankara Buddha. But there are many details in that story, often brushed over or not looked at, and I thought it would be nice to consider along the vein of dependent co-arising, conditionality, causes and conditions that give rise to Buddhas. So I believe it's in the Buddha Wangsa, in the Sutta Pitaka, in the Khuddaka Nikaya, I believe, the origin stories of various Buddhas. So apparently Sumedha was a very gifted yogi living in the mountains and wearing a robe made out of some kind of plant fiber and eating only berries and leaves, etc. And he had rather amazing samadhi. And in this origin story, it describes that Sumedha was actually flying through the air. And that sounds a bit out of this world, doesn't it? So only Superman can do that, right? From a different planet. But apparently, if a practitioner masters the arupa jhanas, so there's the first 4 jhanas and then there's another 4, infinite base of space, infinite base of nothingness, infinite base of consciousness, infinite base of neither perception or non-perception. If a practitioner, and it's nice to consider those a little bit, imagine being able to take the infinite space as your meditation object. Oftentimes we have a sense of our life being cramped and dusty. Wouldn't it be nice to just take empty space as an object, boundless empty space? That's one of the jhanas. Infinite base of consciousness, what would that be like? Apparently it's very radiant, very luminous, also boundless. For those who are fed up with irritating perceptions, what would it be like to be able to take the infinite base of neither perception or non-perception? Be like going on a holiday, wouldn't it? A nice big break. So, apparently, this practitioner had these absorptions, had these abilities, and when a practitioner has those abilities, they develop a certain amount of mastery over the elements, the 4 elements, and that's when it becomes possible to walk on water or fly in the air. So Sumedha was flying through the air, and he noticed, first of all, he noticed people clearing the path, many people clearing a pathway. And then he noticed Lord Buddha, a Buddha, Dipankara Buddha. And then he noticed his following behind him. And I believe he asked, if I remember correctly, somebody and one of the people sweeping the road, and they said, the Buddha is coming, a Buddha is coming. Tathagata, samasambuddha, thus come, thus gone. And Sumedha had an interesting thought. He had the thought, knowing my power, suppose I too were also to cause a multitude to cross over. Meaning that he was aware, he'd seen a Buddha, he'd seen his following, he was aware that they were arahants. Apparently he was aware in his mind that he could become an arahant that day if he'd received a teaching from Dipankara Buddha. But he had the thought, knowing my strength, why don't I too cause a multitude to cross over? It's nice to contemplate these kinds of things because our worlds tend to become kind of small, and we tend to get in our habits, and we all tend to obsess about little things. And it's just nice to think back for asankhya's and 100,000 eons, a bit more spacious. What's an asankhya? An asankhya is what's called an incalculable period. It's such a vast amount of time, only Buddhas can measure it. So the bodhisattvas who develop their parami, their 10 virtues, taking the wisdom approach, have to cultivate further from the point where they already have jhanas and psychic powers and could have been an arahant. They have to cultivate further for asankhya plus 100,000 eons. If a bodhisattva practitioner has a style of faith as their mode, the main style or character trait that they will cultivate in order to be a samasambuddha, it takes twice as long. 8 asankhya plus 100,000 eons. If the bodhisattva has the approach of effort in fulfilling the 10 parami, it will take 16 asankhya plus 100,000 eons. An eon is the time from the Big Bang. The world, the universe expands and then comes back and burns up again. 100,000 of those, that's the small bit at the end. So Buddhas and the bodhisattvas that become Buddhas are really awesome, really amazing. And it's nice to contemplate it because as well as it having a kind of a consciousness expanding effect on the mind, for me it always also gives rise to a certain sense of awe and gratitude and wonder. And those qualities are quite lovely: gratitude, awe, wonder. Apparently Maitreya Bodhisattva, who will become Maitreya Buddha, took the slower 16 asankhya path of effort, because Sumedha, who became Gautama Buddha, spent 4 asankhya. That means that he becomes a Buddha in what's called the degenerating age. So that means that a percentage of humanity are Buddhists, but most aren't. So that was the case in his 45 years of teaching in northern India. There were other sects, and sometimes other sects would argue and have discussions, find fault with the Buddha's doctrine, etc. But normally Lord Buddha would, with his wisdom was superior. In the time of Maitreya Buddha, apparently the entire world will be Buddhists, because in spending 4 times as long accumulating the merit and the qualities and making all of those karmic connections with all of those beings, by the time Maitreya becomes a Buddha, the entire world will be Buddhist. It's another nice contemplation, think back 4 asankhya's, 100,000 eons. One prediction was that Maitreya's coming in 300 million years, I think forward 300 million years, getting a more spacious view of samsara. Apparently, in the time of Maitreya, there are no disasters, there are no famines, there are no wars. And the lifespan is 80,000 years. I once asked Luang Por Anand, Tanajanan, is this possible? He said, yeah, it's possible. I said, how is it possible? He said, well, everybody already has jhana samadhi before the Buddha is enlightened. Everybody has been cultivating their generosity, keeping their ethical precepts, meditating for many, many lives. They have vast merits, so they're already virtuous. That's one of the things that makes the human lifespan longer and longer, is when the humans are more and more virtuous. So at that point, just after the very peak of the eon, 100,000 years lifespan, Maitreya Buddha will come. I like to meditate in Bodh Gaya at the site of the Vajrasana. The Vajrasana, there apparently is only one in the universe, the seat of enlightenment. So the seat of enlightenment in Bodh Gaya is apparently where the three previous Buddhas were enlightened, Kakusanda, Konagamana, and Kassapa, and also where Shakyamuni Gautama was enlightened. And it's also the place where Maitreya Buddha will be enlightened. So Lord Buddha explains in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, his final teaching, that if we can, we should go and pay respects there, because we would gain a very potent type of merit, particularly conducive to liberation, because that is the spot, the seat of liberation. I was once attending the teachings of His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Washington, D.C. about 14 years ago. And the Dalai Lama was giving a 5-day teaching, I believe, on the 37 Bodhipakkhya Dhammas, a list that we have in the Theravada foundation of Buddhist practice, and some other ceremonies and things. On the last day there was a long life ceremony and some kind of a blessing ceremony for the people attending. I think there were about 50,000 people attending, and it was in this big center stadium, like where they usually have rock and roll concerts and stuff. And, it's a very interesting, it was interesting to experience the atmosphere in the stadium change from day one to, actually spent 10 days there. And it became like a little Pure Land. All these smiley monks and nuns arriving from all over the world, and nice Buddhists. And at the very end, His Holiness said something interesting. He said, "I'm content with your sincere efforts at trying to understand these teachings. I believe that the things that we've been doing will have positive ramifications for this city and the rest of the world." He said further, "I feel that I've established some good connection with you as teacher and student." And then he said, "I won't think of you for just a few lifetimes." Having said there's a connection, he said, "I will think of you all, 50,000 people, for eons." And then he said, "So please think of me sometimes." And I was like, wow. Of all the interesting things one hears, that was an interesting thing to hear. And he meant it. And what was very interesting was he said it with total humility and modesty. So I've got this commitment. He was saying, essentially, I'm a bodhisattva practitioner. I'm remaining in the cyclic existence for the sake of benefiting others. I'm committed to that. I will do that for eons. So please think of me sometimes. I was like, wow. So our Buddha did that. Our Buddha did that. And I'm sure it's the case, most of us don't have the abilities to think back, but I'm sure it's the case that each of us, some millions of lives ago, that the being that became Shakyamuni Buddha was a being that we met when he was a bodhisattva, and he would have been kind and generous, and he probably encouraged us in our kindness, in generosity, ethics. And it's these beings who are willing to teach, who are willing to be role models, who encourage people. I think one of the reasons it takes so long, the shortest one being 4 Sankhya in 100,000 eons, is it's not that the spiritual practitioner takes that long to get their insight, their understanding and their qualities perfected. This is something I think sometimes the Theravadan practitioners misunderstand. It's almost like the Bodhisattva hasn't quite worked it out yet after 1 billion lives. Apparently from the time of getting the prediction of Buddhahood, the Bodhisattva will meet at least 20 teaching Buddhas from that time until enlightenment. They've heard the teachings. They know how to practice. What takes so long is getting all of the other beings developed enough to be able to liberate them in the final life. As Samasambuddha said, suppose I were to cause a multitude to cross over. Okay. He could have been an arahant that day. So, what I love about Buddhas, there are many things I love about Buddhas, but what I really love about Buddhas is that for all of their heroic, awesome power, is the tenderness and kindness and patience. They're not obnoxious in their power. They're not overbearing, patiently plodding in samsara for millions of lives in order to liberate other beings. So just the fact that such beings exist, have existed, and similar beings continue to cultivate. But in terms of our Theravadan practice, simply remembering that's what Shakyamuni Buddha did. That's what Gautama Buddha did for us. And it's not a guilt trip. It's to recognize, my goodness, this being cultivated so much further. In the story, Samasambuddha decided to lie down in a muddy puddle so that the Tathagata's feet would not get dirty. Of course, the Buddha was seeing, oh, this is an ordinary being. And Samasambuddha was thinking, due to this act of humility, may I receive a prediction of Buddhahood. Apparently for the Bodhisattva practitioner, if they've not yet received a prediction of Buddhahood from a teaching Buddha, it's not guaranteed yet. You have to receive, and that practitioner has to receive that prediction from a teaching Buddha. And so, rather than step on him, Dipankara Buddha said, in 4 Asankhya's and 100,000 eons, your name will be Siddhartha Gautama, your mother's name will be such and such, your father's name will be such and such. You will have a lifespan so long, you will become enlightened under such and such a tree after practicing austerities for such and such, etc. The whole details of the Buddha's final life, Dipankara Buddha proclaimed. And that was the same for the previous Buddhas, and it's the same for Maitreya Buddha, and many more to come. So when we do our Buddhanusati, I remember once as a junior monk in Wat Nanachar, it was very strict about keeping all the rules. And so we studied the Vinaya a lot for the first few years, all of the monks' rules, 227 rules. And there's these phrases when the silly and naughty monks do bad things, and the Buddha sometimes scolds them and he says, "Oh, you foolish man, it would have been better for you to drink hot iron," and various things he would say. And I remember thinking, I was wondering one day, about 3 years into it, I was wondering, if the Buddha was next door, would I go and pay respects? I'm a bhikkhu and I pay respects to the Buddha every day. And I remember thinking, no. And I'm like, why not? Well, I'd be scared that he'd call me a foolish man. Because of my bad habits. And I realized this is a problem, actually. This is a problem. I shouldn't, as a bhikkhu, I shouldn't have a feeling that I wouldn't pay respects to the Buddha if he was here in person. And so I realized that I needed to contemplate other aspects of Lord Buddha, other qualities. Yes, when someone truly was foolish, the Buddha said that's foolish. Fair enough. But there are many suttas where it starts with the Buddha in his first watch of the morning, after his first meditation. He reviews the world and he sees who can he teach today, who might benefit. And he would walk up to 20 miles to teach one person and establish them in liberation. And so when we think of that Buddha, it's very touching. It says, in the morning chanting, it says, Sabuddho Susudo Karuna Mahanavo. The Buddha, absolutely pure, with ocean-like compassion. So he's not a fierce, mean, judgmental entity that you would come and he would scold and make you feel bad. He's pure. He has ocean-like compassion. He's cultivated for eons so that he would have the ability to teach people perfectly according to their character, according to their karma. So that's a wonderful recollection when we chant the Buddhanusati, Vidya Charana Sampanno, impeccable in conduct and understanding. That's how you can trust that the Buddha would know how to treat you. There's many wonderful occasions where, I think it was Yasa, the prince. Yasa gives me hope, I'll tell you why. There's these super austere five practitioners that the Buddha was practicing with as a bodhisattva. And remember, he realized after 6 years, this patiently enduring that time when the bodhisattva was practicing austerities, had the insight that a spiritual practitioner may have experienced as much suffering in their cultivation as he did, but no one had experienced more. It's a pretty amazing statement. So in terms of patiently enduring painful, racking feelings, as previously the Bodhisattva had practiced the Arupa jhanas, but he could see within that lifetime, that final life, he could see that it wasn't the deathless, it wasn't nibbana, it wasn't liberation. So it was still bound to arising, staying for some time and ceasing. As wonderful as it wasn't liberation. So then he tried, okay, how about the absolute extreme of patient endurance without allowing the mind to absorb into a peaceful state? So he did that for 6 years. And then when he had the insight, this isn't working, and he had the insight into the middle way, suppose I were to combine some concentration with focused contemplation, allow myself to eat and bathe, maybe that would work. He had the insight that it would work. Those 5 practitioners abandoned him, they thought. And this is an interesting thing to notice as well, that this great practitioner had a correct insight into the right way to practice, and his friends abandoned him. So, because they were still convinced that austerity was the way. They all became arahants after the second sermon, the Anattalakkhana Sutta. So those guys are like superheroes, austerity superheroes. And but then there's another one, Yasa, the merchant's son. Apparently he had gold slippers, and he had courtesans, female entertainers, entertaining him, playing instruments, singing songs, dancing. And he fell asleep, and he woke up, and the harem had also fallen asleep in the meantime, and he saw them dribbling and snoring and muttering to themselves and gnashing teeth in their sleep. And poor old Yasa, this delicate merchant's son, had never seen anything so horrible. And he was beside himself. He wandered outside of his mansion saying, "It's awful, it's horrible, oh, it's awful, it's horrible." because of his vast merits, he happened to wander into the deer park where Lord Buddha had just been teaching the 5 great practitioners that became the first 5 arahants. And the Buddha knew his name. We're using his abilities. He said, "Yasa, come here, come here. Let me explain something to you that isn't awful, that isn't horrible." And he sits down, and the Lord Buddha, with his wisdom, understanding how to teach, explained the benefits of generosity, explained the benefits of ethical conduct, spoke to him in a way which was pleasing to him, and then when his heart was glad and content, it gave more wisdom teachings, and Yasa also became one of the arahants. So we have these examples where we see the Buddha's incredible compassion, skill. He knew who he had to be gentle with. He knew who he had to be fierce with. He knew, and he was willing to walk and go and teach one individual person. There's the occasion at the Mahaparinibbana where one last person hadn't understood. Lord Buddha asked, "Has anyone got a question?" He's just about to pass into final Nibbana, and there was one. And I believe Ananda initially said, "Don't bother him at this time." And the Buddha said, "Ananda, this person needs a teaching, bring them." He taught that person, I can't remember their name, but they also became one of the arahants. So when we contemplate in this way, what I'm hoping to encourage in you is a feeling of really loving the Buddha, and in a way seeing how kind of, he's really cool, right? He's really cool. And he's really powerful. And he's really tender. And when we think of that sacrifice, delaying his own liberation for billions of lives, so that he would have the opportunity. We think of how many Buddhists there are in the world now, about 500 million. And that's 2,600 years later. How many hundreds of millions of people have benefited because of that extraordinary effort? And this is apparently the degenerating era. We can see that. There's more wars, there's more famine, there's a lot of problems, diseases. Can you imagine the world if Buddha didn't come at this time? How much worse it might be. So it's nice to give some thought to what Buddhas are. Of course, he doesn't say that we have to follow that path. During his teaching career, he often says, strive on to realize that which can be realized. He was teaching people to be liberated in that life. And in the Theravada Suttas, there aren't, as far as I'm aware, any examples of him encouraging somebody to be a Buddha. Not in our Sutta Pitaka. There is one example where somebody wanted to offer him a robe, and he said no, offer it to the monk at the end of the line, and that person was disappointed apparently. And then the Buddha said, "Oh, don't be disappointed. This is the future Buddha Maitreya." And then oh, cool, okay, I'll offer my robe to him. Yeah. So there is the example of Maitreya continuing to build his virtue in this sasana. In Sri Lanka, I think it's understood that Buddhaghosa Bhikkhu, who composed the Visuddhimagga, is believed to have been an incarnation of Maitreya. And in Thailand, there are some very significant monks from 200, 300 years ago that are also believed to be incarnations of Maitreya. So we have past Buddhas, the current Buddha, future Buddhas. And when we do our Buddhanusati and we recollect them with deep gratitude and love and trust, that's the kind of quality, if it's very deep in the heart, that is going to help you meet one. If ever you get separated from the dispensation or from a Buddhist culture. So I just wanted to say that with our Buddhanusati, feel free to embrace it wholeheartedly, feel lots of love and respect, as well as confidence in the teachings, and cultivate your quick liberation if that's what you want. And if you want to practice for 4 asankhya's and 100,000 eons, you can do that too. I offer that for your reflection. if anybody wants to ask questions, that's okay too. A couple of questions.
I have read through the Chronicles of the Buddha by Bhikkhu Ananda Jyoti. The earth, the world that we're living in, it is impermanent. But from the so many eons and kasapas, the name of the mountains and the people are still the same. Right. So that strikes me, is it always a repetition of the same world system?
Yeah, I don't know. We have in the Jataka stories, which obviously encompass a great period of time, that the Bodhisattva is practicing in Benares and studying in Taxila, and so I've noticed that as well. I don't know. But apparently there is always a Vajrasana. There's always a kind of an escape hatch in the middle of the matrix, which is interesting. So, yeah. Do you remember what the oracle says to Neo when he goes to see the oracle? She says, "You have the gift, but it seems like you're waiting for something." So, so maybe he's going to be a future samasambuddha. I've also heard that different universes have like different, slightly different rules or potentialities, like the Western universe, and you can be a Buddha in heaven. In the Southern universe, you have to be a Buddha in the human world. But I guess if we can't know it for ourselves, we don't have to think about it too much. And then I guess the point is Buddhas exist, and we want to keep meeting them in their teachings until we liberate ourselves.
I'm actually not very familiar with the story about Maitreya. Did you say that the whole world would be Buddhist?
That's right.
When the next one comes,
yeah.
Right? So I wondered, what is the purpose of having a samasambuddha at that time?
They become Buddhist.
Yes.
They become Buddhist once he's realized his enlightenment and taught the first sermon. That's when they become Buddhist. The point is, after he teaches, the whole world becomes a Buddhist world for a period of time.
Okay.
Until he's enlightened, they're not Buddhists.